Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Soldatich, she, her, and I am the Canada Excellence Chair in Health, Equity and Community Wellbeing at Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for joining us today for our speakers series on transnational policy responses, gender-based violence and women and girls with disabilities with Valérie Grand-Masson. Today's event is hybrid, with some gathered here on TMU campus and others join us online from across Canada and beyond. Live captioning is provided. For those online, please select the CC button on your Zoom menu bar in order to see the captions. Before we start the event, I would like to offer an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country and land. Because I am Australian, I acknowledge those from Australia and Canada as well. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, acknowledging First Nations people's shared experience and impact of colonisation on their health and wellbeing, their families and kinship networks and communities. Just to give you a little bit about the CERC in health, equity and community wellbeing, we're a transformative research initiative that employs an engaged community partnership approach to expand our understanding, practice and delivery of health outcomes for all members of our communities. Through collaboration with a network of healthcare institutions, service providers and civil society organisations, the program aims for a paradigm shift, one that challenges a siloed, expert-driven approach to health and wellbeing and moves towards community-engaged, preventative models of wellbeing. Uniquely applying a critical disability studies lens, the research program aims to not only reduce health disparities that are inextricable from their social context. I will learn that word next time, I promise. But to embed community knowledge into healthcare institutions, systems, and models of delivery. So over to our event. I am thrilled to introduce our guest today, Valérie Grand-Masson, pronouns she, her. Valérie Grand-Masson is a researcher, activist and mother. She is a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Guelph, Ontario. Her research takes an intersectional feminist approach and focuses on gender-based violence, activism and notions of justice for diverse women with disabilities in Canada and internationally. She has also taught undergraduate courses on disability and gender-based violence. She has published scholarly articles and chapters on the impacts of the COVID pandemic on people with disabilities, violence against women and girls with disabilities, and the housing situation of people with disabilities. I'd now actually like to welcome Valérie to take over the floor and to begin her presentation on transnational policy responses, gender-based violence and women and girls with disabilities. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. What is a little difficult is that the camera's here, but the people are here. So I'll be looking back and forth, but probably just at my notes. So I'm sorry in advance. I want to thank the Canadian Excellent Research Chair in Health, Equity and Community Wellbeing for inviting me to talk with everyone today about this important work and also the ideas that are coming up but not totally formed. And I really look forward to the Q&A to further discuss these topics. I want to also acknowledge that I live in Tiohtià:ke in Montreal, where it's the gathering place of many First Nations historically and still today. In my work, I aim to question how disability has been modelized by Western powers to diminish, to segregate people who do not fit neoliberal productive norms. But I also want to question, I'm also interested in the processes of historical and ongoing colonialism that create disability and meanings of disability. So today I'm here with Professor Karen Soldatich to talk about our ongoing project on transnational policy responses addressing violence against women and girls with disabilities. Next slide, please. This project is a thematic study embedded in a 7-year partnership grant named Engendering Disability Inclusive Development, funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, CERC. This is a collaborative project between researchers and disability organizations in 4 countries, Canada, Haiti, South Africa, and Vietnam. The goals of what we call EDID is to uncover, co-create, and share knowledge about the challenges and progress of women and girls with disabilities, and to promote the development policies that reduce barriers and foster inclusion and participation. Our specific study falls into the transnational stream of this partnership, where we look at the ways in which women with disabilities and allies come together across nations to promote inclusion, well-being, and rights. The transnational team is led by Professor Dominique Masson at the University of Ottawa and with the help of Clotilde Parent-Chartier. They already examined the strategies and discourses used by disability organizations in UN spaces, and they found that the key concern of women with disabilities was gender-based violence. That many women with disabilities want to bring visibility to the issue of gender-based violence, and that's a key reason to mobilize. So this is why Professor Soldacic and I are interested in understanding precisely how women with disabilities, disability organizations, and allies address gender-based violence in transnational spaces. Our research questions are, 1, how do feminist disability activists understand violence against women with disabilities? And 2, what strategies and discourses do feminist disability activists use when working together across nations in their advocacy to end violence against women with disabilities? So today I'll provide the background, the historical context for this study, really the work that I've done through a literature review of publicly available documents, as our project is still awaiting ethics approval, of course. And then we'll end with our next steps in the project and on our contributions. This project, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Yes, this is a strategic moment to study what we want to study. First, historically and still today, rates of violence against women and girls with disabilities are high in every context, in every country, especially in the global South, especially against girls with disabilities, and especially against those who are labeled with intellectual disabilities or have developmental and cognitive disabilities. The form of gender disability violence overlap with gender-based violence, including sexual, physical, financial, and emotional abuse, but also take disability-specific forms like coercive control of medication or assistive devices, manipulation, and controlling disability benefits. Those types of violence are rooted in colonial and structural violence, in the sense that it is in the dynamics of attitudes towards those seen to not fit productive, gendered, and racial ideals. Those that do not fit what is deemed useful to society. The dynamics of these attitudes are shaped and further shaping by material conditions that make women and girls with disability live in invisibility and precarious situations. The second reason why it's a strategic moment is that there's a renewed transnational movement against gender-based violence, one that is rooted through Me Too, that's really expanded in the last 10 years, Ni Una Menos, that recognizes the state as the perpetrator of femicide or the murder of women. And more recently, how the Israeli violence on Gaza disproportionately impact women and girls. It is in this context that feminist activists in the world have recognized and named the systemic and institutionalized nature of violence and the role of the state and colonial powers in perpetrating that. Finally, there's a movement to decolonize the disability movement. We now recognize mass disabling event, colonial events that create enormous social suffering and create disabilities at large scales. So we ask, how do we build disability communities and disability advocacy while reckoning with the violence underlying disability? Moving on to the next slide. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework that guide our work, namely transnational advocacy and transnational advocacy networks. We root this project in transnational feminist and disability scholarship. Transnational disability scholars teach us that the lived experiences and struggles of people with disabilities are shaped by historical and global processes such as colonialism and capitalism. Specifically, they argue for the importance of historical relations of colonialism to understand the production of impairment, as well as the meaning and associated social and political responses to disability. Transnational feminists, namely Mohanty, Growell, and Kaplan, bring attention to the social conditions that shape and facilitate the processes of advocacy and mobilization among feminists. They argue that conditions in which differently situated women live and advocate are shaped by historical processes, which lead to uneven power dynamics across civil society organizations. And that's going to be really important in what we find. Finally, collective action is not aspatial, especially when we talk about transnational sphere. It is rooted somewhere, right? And it's important to bring attention to the impact that the anchor has. It is shaped in a specific location with specific histories. So feminist scholar Dominique Masson problematizes the tendency to refer to a transnational sphere as existing out there. And instead, we have to look how the discourses are shaped by local and national context. So the transnational analysis looks at the relationship between local and international practices and discourses. A transnational lens brings into view, even if partially, how advocacy challenges or reproduces global politics of power. Finally, my second theoretical framework, it's transnational advocacy network. Next slide, please. Thank you. I draw from Margaret Keck and Catherine Sicking from 1998, theorization of transnational advocacy networks, which they define as those relevant actors working internationally on an issue who are bound together by shared values, common discourse, and dense exchanges of information. Transnational advocacy networks are associated with social movements like feminism. They are distinct from traditional social movement strategies such as mass mobilization or contentious politics, as they are driven by few individuals, elitist individuals, and NGOs with technical expertise and access to more powerful actors. Keck and Sicking posit that the generation and dissemination of information is central to transnational advocacy networks. So NGOs become instrumental in producing information that can be used at national and international levels. It is really through transnational advocacy networks that the use of testimonies or storytelling has become relevant, has become more dominant in transnational policy spaces. So they use the power of information, ideas to alter the type of information that these big institutions would gather. So for us, the Transnational Advocacy Network, they bring into focus how meanings about a specific issue is constructed, negotiated, contested. So next slide, please. So this is kind of my summary of my talk, because my talk is very long. So if you're going to take two takeaways from this, is that the transnational feminist disability movement is built and continues to grow around United Nations mechanism, driven by professionalization, rooted in a global north, and discourses of vulnerability that narrow understandings of GBV and strategies to address it. At the same time, UN mechanisms offer opportunities for sharing testimonies, knowledge, skills, and resources among diverse groups of women with disabilities internationally, even outside of UN spaces. And most importantly, they provide a common language of rights. So now we dive into a not so brief overview of transnational feminist disability advocacy. There's not much scholarly literature on the transnational feminist movement, but when there is, they identify the beginning of the movement in 1995. I start the beginning of the movement in 1980. It was really at the early stage of the disability rights movement, wherein people with disabilities took control of disability organizations, that women started being involved at their national levels and at their transnational level. The foundation of the first international non-governmental organization ran by and for people with disability, Disabled People International, DPI, was founded in 1981. DPI was born after years and years of advocacy from consumer groups to gain control over the services they receive and policies that impacted their lives. The foundation of DPI signified not only the politicization of the disabled identity, but also a building of a transnational community that saw themselves as leaders. The key strategies for DPI was to engage with the UN. From the beginning, agenda item number 1 is to engage with the UN. It was to place persons with disabilities on the international development agenda and ensure the realization of their human rights. In 1980, DPI became a member of the UN Advisory Committee for the UN International Year of Disabled Persons. And soon after, they gained the status as consultant to a number of UN agencies. It also received operational funding from the UN. I really place a lot of importance on this because it's going to really shape the rest of the feminist disability movement at the transnational space, this engagement with, and dare I say, obsession with the UN. Next slide. Yeah. So the beginning, while there was no explicit gendered lens to early activities of DPI, it allowed women with disabilities involved in this organization to develop skills and experience in advocating at local, national, transnational levels, including with the UN. At the 1985 Nairobi Conference of Women, women with disabilities from DPI, alongside other disabled women from different local and national organizations or public servants, came together to bring visibility to the issues relevant to disabled women in international institutions. The feminist disability leaders succeeded at including disabled women as a group requiring special concern in the Nairobi forward-looking strategies of the advancement of women. Basically, what this means is that a group of disabled women, DPIs, mostly women from the global north that were either public servants or other sorts of bureaucrats that had some level of professionalization, really sought to bring visibility to the vulnerability of women with disabilities. And that's really how women with disabilities were first framed at the UN as an especially vulnerable group. At the same time, DPI held a second World Conference in the Bahamas in 1985. At this conference, the Disabled Women's Network of Canada organized a session by and for women with disabilities. That was the first time that an international conference had really a section, a workshop, a space dedicated for women with disabilities. Where they could discuss the key issues and they identify self-image, violence, and mothering as key issues to bring forward to DPI, although DPI kept ignoring their concerns and not hearing their voices. Moving on to next slide. So here, 1995, I think, really marks the collective, the really energetic, dynamic start the start of the movement at the transnational level, when more than 200 disabled women from 25 countries went to the 1995 Beijing Conference for Women and Associated NGO Forum. To prepare a united discourse of and for disabled women for this event, disabled women were invited at the first international symposium on issues of women with disabilities the day before the NGO Forum. This event was organized by Mobility International USA. I will go back to them soon. The symposium allowed for women with disabilities to actively participate in decision-making processes regarding issues affecting their lives and how their issues should be addressed at the NGO Forum and at the conference for women. At the NGO Forum, women with disabilities challenged the invisibility of disabled women's experiences and activism within feminist movements. They did that by organizing workshops, presenting papers about their common and diverse experiences, and they even held mass demonstrations at the NGO Forum, really decrying the lack of accessibility. That was the first time that there was a public demonstration, a public protest at the NGO Forum, and it was done by women with disabilities, which I find really cool. They demanded inclusion, accessibility, recognition as sisters, as right holders, as leaders. They successfully advocated for disability-specific language in the Beijing Platform for Action, which is considered one of the most influential documents in feminist transnational policy. Next slide, I do want to play a really short video. It's 30 seconds. Back to the video. Thank you. Not working. No.
It's just an image. Is it on YouTube?
On YouTube.
Ourselves now. What's it called? What's it called?
I would say Visions of Disabled Women, 4th Conference on Women. Yeah, that's the one.
This one, right?
I guess we can watch this.
There? You have to, you're not gonna have the plane right now.
Starts at 5:08, the little thing
Oh,
ready to
doesn't.
play.
You just send me the link for it in the chat.
It's only 30 seconds. It's cool though. Okay, we can
Do it at the end.
Let's shoot it then, yeah.
do it at the end. So I do want to talk about Mobility International USA because they're the one who organized this symposium for women with disabilities right before the Beijing NGO Forum. And they also organize pretty much every other international event afterward. But so they were funded by MIUSA was funded by Susan Siegel and Barbara Williams in the United States, 2 white women that were really involved in, had ideas about development, the international development policies. So the work of Mobility International USA is mostly to provide training and workshops and development skills to Global South countries. So they deliver training programs internationally, and they also create exchange programs based on leadership skills, business skills. Microcredit is a huge one in the Global South. I say this because this brings a specific lens in which they understand disability, responses to disability, as well as the relationship between the Global North and the Global South. And in 1997, they will form the International Women's Institute on Leadership and Disability, which to this day has trained over 600 women with disabilities, representing 89 countries. These women have started their local, national, international organizations of women with disabilities or disability rights. These are the women with disabilities most leaders. Many of them have gone through the WILD program provided by Mobility International USA. I think that's really important to understand because the role of the WILD program of Mobility International cannot be overstated in shaping disability policies, especially in the Global South, because of this training program. Anyways, but at this forum, sorry, I'm very passionate about this. But at the symposium, they ask women with disabilities, they say, what do you want? What do you want from the transnational movement? What do you want from feminist disability advocacy at the international level? And what women with disabilities want, slide, they want an inclusive in the sense of accessible, but also exclusive in the sense of only us, only for us, space to share stories, learn from and learn with each other across nations, to really develop skills. And they also want full and meaningful participation in the women's movement, the disability movement, the human rights movement, and they want leadership training and opportunities. So that's from there, that's how Mobility International developed this Women's Institute on Leadership and Disability and other international symposium, really based on creating spaces for women with disabilities, but also based on leadership and business opportunities. Let's talk about the CRPD. Next. So in the 2000s, there was an ad hoc committee formed to create a new international convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. But in the absence of international civil society organizations, there was the International Disability Caucus formed to really ensure that the lived experiences and knowledges of people with disabilities would be represented. And a lot of women with disabilities were involved in this caucus. There was no international organization of women with disabilities then, so women with disabilities had to work together informally and to ensure their influence, right? So it's people that were already well-known, people with relationship to powerful actors, to governments, that were able to have influence in shaping the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Bangkok draft, which was written by an Asian Pacific collective of governmental and non-governmental organizations, including the Asia Pacific Network of Women with Disabilities, as well as other national disability and human rights organizations, was really important in advocating for intersectional and gendered approaches. So they argued for both specific language, so a standalone article in the CRPD, as well as really having gendered mainstream throughout the convention. So having gendered specific language in the preamble and throughout the convention. So here, what is significant is that the Korean network of women with disabilities work closely with the Korean government and UN officials to integrate a standalone article protecting the rights of women with disabilities. They argued that given the specific and systemic oppression of women with disabilities in the global South, they have to be named in order to really force states to take it seriously. Otherwise, states might push it aside. The implementation of a standalone article and twin track approach. The twin track approach is the standalone article and gendered specific language throughout, is a substantial step forward in addressing the complex and unique challenges faced by women and girls with disabilities. It serves as a declaration mandating that states must actively protect and advance gender equality across all sectors of society. Sorry. Didn't understand that. The development signifies the growing recognition of intersectionality in addressing discrimination and promoting inclusive policies. The CRPD was adopted by the UN General Assembly on December 10, 2006. The first CRPD committee included 5 women among the 12 members as a result of a balanced representation mandated in Article 34. Yet, only 5 years later, there was only 1 member out of 12 that was a woman with disabilities. And then later it was one member out of 18 members. So although gender, it is mentioned as well as other factors, including geographical region, political systems, and disability advocacy, they really struggle to keep the representation of diverse people with disabilities in the CRPD committee. Now I'm gonna gloss over the last 20 years a little faster because it's a section called precarious gains. In the last 2 decades, a number of transnational disabled women's organizations were established, bringing together women with disabilities from different nations. So first, in 2008, there was the International Network of Women with Disabilities. I think it's still going on. I think it's a Facebook group. I'm in the process of discovering more about this, but this is an organization really focused on violence against women with disabilities and framing it as a crime, 2, a human rights violation. In 2009, they wanted to raise awareness. They had a campaign raising awareness among national and international entities about violence against women with disabilities. And they really rely on UN definitions of gender-based violence, which really sometimes erase structural roots of gender-based violence. And they rely on UN data, UN documents to advocate for the importance of addressing gender-based violence. They sought to engage local and national governments, UN bodies as the main protector of rights, as the main actors responsible to address gender-based violence. The group functioned mostly on an online forum in the 2010s, and now as a Facebook page welcoming posts from different groups of women with disabilities globally. Their impact is not known for me at this time. A more impactful group, I would say, is Women Enabled International, established in 2012 by a group of women, American women in Washington, who had close ties to the US government as well as UN mechanisms. They aim to bridge the gap between the women's rights and disability rights movement in order to improve the lives of disabled women globally. They are an advocacy organization with offices in the UK and Spain, and they are building relationship with lawyers, human rights experts, and relevant organizations. They get donor funding. They conduct research and consultations. They address violence against women with disabilities by submitting reports to UN bodies. And they publish self-advocacy tools on the rights of disabled women. They provide training and research about gender-based violence to service providers, again, framed in human rights language. And they share information about violence against women with disabilities in various contexts, like mostly in UN spaces. Women Enabled is very active at the UN level, very recognized, and influential. And finally, there's a few regional networks that are popping up, but I say precarious gains because it seems difficult to sustain groups that are not either funded by the UN or directly involved in the UN or their national states. For example, there's the Network of African Women with Disabilities and the Alianza Latinoamericana de Mujeres con Discapacidad. Sorry, my Spanish not great. These networks were founded in the 2000s, and they advocate in key sectors such as healthcare, education, criminal justice system, as well as general society to raise awareness and address structural barriers to the realization of rights. I'm gonna stop my story. That's a long story. Let's, next slide. So what? So I've talked a little bit about the story, and this is a history based on publicly available documents. So I suspect that there's a lot I don't know that I couldn't find, but most of what I found is the boomerang effect in full force, in the sense that the transnational feminist disability movement is built and growing around UN mechanisms. It's driven by professional bureaucrats, global North women, and uses discourses of vulnerability, human rights, and understanding of GBV. This movement, as I found it, is overwhelmingly concerned with UN mechanisms in order to put pressure on local governments. This is the boomerang effect, with gains that are not clear. This movement, and we do trace another motivation for transnational advocacy, which is learning from and with each other, building leadership skills, supporting each other across the world, recognizing each other's experiences, sharing testimonies. That seems to have been very, very important. It's really to challenge the invisibility of women with disabilities. Yes, I could keep talking about this, but the importance of testimonies is really important, of storytelling. I think in the video that we might look at later, it's a 12-minute video. There's the link in the slides. Maybe we'll share with everyone after. But what is great is people share their stories and where they're coming from and why they're advocates, right? They are used to persuade, to convince both movements, the disability and women's movement, and international entities that their issues needed to be addressed urgently. But in doing so, it often reproduces disability as something negative, as somewhat of a tragedy, as somewhat of something to be overcome. So there's the balance here. The last point I should make, yes, is that I found that in engaging in human rights mechanism, because human rights are often based on like individual claims, the disability rights movement in the last 40 years have moved away from reckoning with the colonial processes that create disabilities. In the 1980s, disability organizations were mostly concerned with landmines creating disabilities, with war, with post-conflict states and contexts. But the human rights really discourse has moved past that to focus more on individual claims and rights and legal systems. Something that Professor Karen Soldati has written lots about. So all of this to say that our project, going back to our project, once we get ethics, what are we going to do? We want to go talk to feminist disability advocates from around the world in national and international organizations. We want to know, how do they understand violence against women with disabilities? what are the dynamics of violence against women with disabilities in their context, and how do they address it? What are the strategies to address violence against women with disabilities? We may find things that have not been documented before. We may find things that have not been associated with the UN, and we're really excited about it. We're going to lead semi-structured interviews, and I hope we're going to do a workshop as well to, again, bring these women together and dream and imagine a future together. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Valerie. And it's great having you here. I mean, one thing for me that's really interesting is the discussion about, I guess, the whitening or the westernization of the disability movement at a global scale. And one of the discussions at the recent Leeds Disability Studies Conference, they were looking at the historical archives and how actually, you know, some of the most radical thinking within disability studies, or where the whole idea of the social model of disability comes from, actually is embedded in an African Marxism of anti-apartheid struggle. And that's because we forget to think about how some of the leaders of the disability movement, particularly in the UK, were themselves expelled as white, often white Jewish, if we think of Vic Finkelstein and his partner, they were white Jewish ANC cadre members of the underground anti-apartheid movement, and they were expelled. And they bring that knowledge of imprisonment, institutionalization, and struggle for justice to disability lived experience. And so while there's this history of whitening, in actual some of the core principles at its foundational moments back in the 60s and 70s really comes from an African Marxism of what does post-colonial, anti-racist, anti-imperialist struggle mean. And some of the discussion at the Leeds conference was, how do we bring that, that historical genealogy of the disability movement back into the Western gaze that's become particularly focused on individual identity rather than practices of solidarity at a global scale. So it's been, I have to say, it's been wonderful to work with Valerie, her engagement with the subject area, her commitment and lifelong engagement with disability politics as a disabled woman herself has been really the driving force of this project. And most of the time I'm actually being led by Valerie rather than me leading Valerie. So thank you very much for joining us today.